Hello, welcome to Understory, and joining me in the war room down under today is Nick. Hi, Nick.
G'day, how you going, Cam?
Well, I'm going pretty well after a state election in South Australia, which was a surprise to many people.
Yeah, it was a very intriguing result for those of us who like to follow politics. Of course, we were gaming it out in advance.
Yes.
And my understanding is your predictions were better than mine.
Yeah, better, but not quite. I was actually a bit surprised. I predicted 5, I rolled it back to 4, lower house, and it looks like being 7, I think. 7?
Yeah, there's
net loss?
certainly enough seats have moved into the Labor camp for them to form majority government, which that's what I hadn't expected. I had thought that they would pick up at least 2 of the 3 marginal seats, and probably maybe one of their stretch goals, the seat of Elder, was I thought maybe they'd pick it up. Well, they picked up Elder. The likelihood you get Davenport, Finnis was an unusual one, but a new independent candidate. But they may even, outside bet, we never expected, the Premier himself may lose his seat.
Yeah, well, that's still tracking with postal votes. The other outstanding was Cregan in Cavell, and so he's 68%, I think. I mean, that's just astonishing.
That's right. And so there were 3 incumbent independents who were Liberals at the last election. They left the party during the last term, ran as independents. Of those, I thought maybe one of them would win, maybe Fraser Ellis, but 2 of them, and then a couple of other independents out of nowhere. So
they'll sit on a crossbench,
Big crossbench this time. A lot of independents,
which theoretically would lean towards Liberal. Theoretically, but there's no predictable.
Well, some of them, yes, but one, I think in Finnis, and I can't remember her name, but if you read the about, she says that she admires Zali Steggall, and that's one of the reasons she ran as an independent. And, so she would not lean. She would not lean to the Liberals.
No, she wouldn't. So it wasn't just the lower house though. It was the upper house, which was pretty convincing. With the way it's looking, it's not fully counted at this point.
Yeah, and the upper house can give you some population-wide trends, which is interesting because it tells you really how people on the whole in South Australia have been or have not been shifting their views on things. I was intrigued with the upper house to compare it to the last election. The problem with South Australia, it has been a problem, the problem has gone away, but the problem has been for the last 20 years the Nick Xenophon effect. He came in like a wrecking ball, and if you want to interpret the statistics, you had Nick Xenophon just swallowing up 20% of the vote, and you didn't know where it would have gone if he hadn't got it.
Yep.
And then after him, you had SA Best, which held on to that legacy while they kept their description on the ballot as Nick Xenophon's SA Best party. And then now they're just SA Best, they got like 1% of the vote. So they are well and truly among the various minor parties that
it was interesting. I was on polling day, I was actually talking to the sitting Liberal member in my seat, and in handing out how to votes. And he made that point that that vote wasn't there this time, so he was actually quite confident. So the assumption being that would drift to him.
Yeah.
He held that seat by 6.5%. He now holds it by 0.5%.
Yeah.
So it didn't drift to him, and in fact it swung away. So
there were some seats where, I was looking earlier at the seat of Unley because it seemed a rather unexpected one that might go to Labor. 20% Green.
Yeah.
Last time it was 9% Green and about 11% SA Best. So basically all the SA Best vote went to the Greens in that seat. But statewide, the upper house seat, so if you compared it to the last state election, you had this Nick Xenophon effect, and unfortunately it's hard to interpret. Compare it to the last federal election, and I think this is where my predictions were more right than yours, that there really wasn't a whole lot of shift. You have a bog standard distribution across Australia that you get, and it's kind of throughout the West. 35% of people for the centre left, 35% for the centre right, 15% for the far left, 15% for the far right. It's kind of Gaussian.
Well, where I got it wrong was the minor parties. I really felt there was going to be...
on the right.
I got the swing almost right. I relaxed it a bit a week before. I thought it'd come back a Liberal. In fact, it went the other way.
I shouldn't have. You should have gone extreme.
But the minor party vote was in its totality and aggregated, it was 12 to 15, no more than 15% for all minor independent parties.
Yeah, for the right-wing minor parties. If you add up your Christian and your Freedom parties, your One Nation and your Lib Democrats, between them, they were lucky to get 12.5%. And if you look at the last federal election, between them, they got something like 11.5%. So maybe 1%, maybe 1 in 100 or 1 in 50 people discovered that they were libertarians in the last term. And a lot of people thought that was going to be a lot more.
Well, I certainly did, and in certain seats, you know, like the Family First was picking up 3.5%, 4%, Australian Family Party 4%, One Nation 3%, so that's like 12, 15%, maximum 15%. So that wasn't enough, certainly in the primary vote, but even, and in fact, some of the preferences, for example, in Marshall's seat, some of the Family First preferences have actually gone to the Labor Party.
That's not unexpected. That actually happens all the time. And in South Australia, I can understand it because we have some pretty good conservative Christians in the Labor camp, and we have some in the Liberal camp who really alienated the Christian vote over the last period by actually nominating and voting for late-term abortion and euthanasia and a number of issues that definitely Christian voters just cannot support.
Well, they punished the Liberal Party. That particular segment of the electorate punished the Liberal Party. They were targeting key seats like King and Newland and so on. But now we have, with this upper house control, really, and lower house, with this quite a healthy margin, we have a very strong position for the new leader, the new Premier, to govern from. I mean, they have quite a bit of tolerance and quite a bit of strength. So they will advance their policies. The question will be for the Conservative voter, Conservative/Christian, will they get the kind of policy advancements that they would hope for? Already there's some nervousness around that.
And the upcoming battles, I guess, in the social policies and the things that Christians care about, there's obviously religious freedom just comes up frequently. You get religious vilification bills and things like that. They've never gone through in the past. I don't think they will. And then you have, I think, coming up conversion therapy is going to be on the cards. And so when conversion therapy bill is put forward, I would hope that in Peter Malinauskas you have a receptive ear, at least, to talk to. And you've got to admit...
But he will be one voice, though. If he doesn't, if he's not able to lead with strength on those moral issues, the various factions within the Labor Party, as there were in the Liberal Party, the so-called moderates, will quietly erode that position. So this is the dilemma. This is the dilemma for the Conservative vote, which is called the Conservative vote. Centre-right to right. Where does that vote find a home? And that's why I thought the minor party, independents, would actually pick up a lot more, perhaps not win a seat, but at least in the upper house. And if there's one seat that will go in the upper house, it will be One Nation through preferences, and that will be a just position. You know, like it's only just. I mean,
that's right. It's going to be 4 Liberal, 4, possibly 5 Labor, definitely 1 Green, and probably One Nation picking up that last one.
Yeah, we won't know that for a little while, but that one position won't be enough with Greens and Labor and so on to actually hold the tide. So
no, but I'm still optimistic that when it comes to some of these specific issues and like conversion therapy particularly, that we will have enough receptive ears. Remember that crossbench in the lower house has a lot of Conservatives in it. A lot of the independents who have won, who were former Liberals, they have voted well in the past, and they're fairly conservative representatives. And among the Labor camp there are too. And if you look at the list of the Liberal representatives that we've lost, they all voted late-term abortion, and most of them voted it. There's a couple of exceptions. And one thing I just wanted to bring out, because it really annoyed me, was the redistricting. So in this last term, of course, between every pair of elections, they moved the electoral boundaries because of population distribution shift. And it was pretty clear that this last time they redistricted in a way that punished a couple of independents in particular. So Francis Bedford in Florey and also Brock. And so what happened is both Francis Bedford and Brock actually decided to run in different electorates to last time because so many of their voters had been moved across the electoral boundary. Well, for Francis Bedford, that means that she lost. For Brock, it actually meant that he successfully won against Dan Van Holst-Pellekaan, who was the deputy leader. And we may be in a position, we will know soon, but we may be in a position where the Premier and the deputy leader both don't win their own seats back.
Which is unusual.
Yeah, but that's a shame, because Dan Van Holst-Pellekaan I actually quite liked as a minister. He was quite effective, he spoke well, and he also voted well on the issues that I cared about. So I'm going to miss him. But a lot of the others that we lost, I'm not really going to miss them.
That as an undercoat for this comment, we're now looking at not just a new Labor Party and a new Premier and some casualties as you've just been talking of, but we're looking at a government which has got a significant position to govern from and is in for, in my opinion, at least 2 terms. I mean, they would have to really blow things up to lose enough seats to lose power.
That's right, and you can't know what will happen in the next 4 years, of course, but the natural flow of things would say they've got to lead. They can
so what that means
two
from a
terms.
government point of view, they can come in and they can look at an 8-year horizon and go, okay, we've got confidence to govern over an 8-year period and to bring the things in that we want to bring in and actually
And plan it out.
and plan it out rather than be thinking about the next election and going, well, we could be out, we better be careful.
Yeah.
So that's a good and bad thing depending on your, philosophy. But that's the impact. So when people made the decision to put a Labor government in, they've gone with a swing of what I think was 8% or 9% roughly across the state. They've put them in for 2 terms. So
Most likely.
Most likely, and possibly longer. I've heard someone say 3 to 4.
Well, last time they were in for 16 years, and SA is an interesting state, but I do think that if the Liberals can pull themselves together to provide an alternative, that is actually an alternative that their base wants, then of course they still have a chance of winning an election.
Which brings us to an interesting point, because this is surely a fork in the road for the Liberal Party to do an internal review. The commentator, the minister from the Liberal Party in New South Wales Elliott has said, when you move away from your base, when a centre-right party moves away from its base, your base will move away from you. And that's really what's happened.
Yeah.
And they've gone towards the Labor Party, which is kind of weird, but that's what's happened.
It's happened here. It's happened in many jurisdictions. It's been very common over the last multiple years. I think there are parties at play who know that the game is inside the major parties,
yes,
and that is where they can have influence. And that's a lesson that I think we need to learn from this.
So you're the Liberal Party, right?
Yeah.
Do you then try and shape yourselves around this Labor Party that's got this 4 to 8 year time span that we just talked about? Or do you say, no, we want to give the electorate a really strong centre-right option and stand on the values that the Liberal Party was actually founded on, in the Menzies era, a la DeSantis kind of, that more towards the right perhaps? Do you do that? Or do you say, we'll be an echo of the Labor Party. The Labor Party won. Nike make good shoes, we'll make good shoes and call ourselves Adidas, but they'll look like Nike shoes.
Yeah, so that is exactly the conundrum that happens, and a very flawed argument that gets presented, because you could say, all right, what do we need to learn from this? We need to learn what the people want. The people clearly wanted Labor, so if we were just Labor, they would want us. Right? The problem is then what you end up with is an authentic centre-left party called Labor and an inauthentic centre-left party called Liberal.
Well,
you have a united
I would
party
argue they've
and a
already done that.
disunited party.
In the seat of King,
Exactly.
they had a vote ticket for the Liberals, had 1 Liberal, 2 Greens. Now, let's say I was a rusted-on Liberal voter, and I walk into the area and I'm given the how to vote, and I look at it and I go, and then there's no name there, by the way. There's a name and no party.
Yeah.
But if I were on the ballot, on the how to vote, there is, and you go, Greens, so you're the Liberal Party and you're telling me I should vote 2 for Greens. What has happened to the Liberal Party that I thought represented my values? So they were sending messages to people, because I spoke to some people from that particular booth, and there were some Liberal Party people who were not aware, they weren't alert to the how to vote, they've seen it for the first time, and it was brought to their attention. They were saying, what? And this is when you're trying to be progressive, and the so-called moderates who controlled the party of recent times, the messaging to centre-right and right voters is, we're basically a surrogate Labor Party. And the voter has clearly said, that's not what we want. So if they are going to do a review, they can't be doing, I agree with you, it's like they've got to actually give something that's authentic and an option where people can say, well, that will give us another way forward.
You want to be authentic and you want to be united internally as a party. Which means that you actually need to reflect the values of the aggregate of the people who join your party and vote for your party traditionally. And we know that when and late-time abortion, look, it is a bit of a litmus test, and it was a wake-up call for a lot of people. We know that a huge number of people joined the Liberal Party in response to that because they realised inside the party it actually has an identity crisis, and there needs to be a fight for its identity. Now, if there's an upside to this election, I think there's a lot of upsides actually. I'm quite optimistic. But one upside is it's easier for the Liberal Party to change when it's in opposition. And we have a pretty good argument for change in the fact that they lost.
They wouldn't have changed
but
if
people
they...
need to make that argument. That needs to be that argument needs to be hashed out. And for those who say no, the answer is to be more like Labor because they were the ones who won, when you say that's wrong. People who want someone like Labor vote for Labor because they're authentically what they are.
You're a try-hard Labor Party.
Exactly. There's you don't win as a lino. And I think you look at recent elections throughout the West, and it's pretty clear that the pollsters always overestimate how well moderate right-wing parties are going to do. And when we had Turnbull, that was certainly the case. Vast overestimate from the pollsters and the pundits about how well Turnbull would do as a leader of the Liberals federally. Well, that argument has to be hashed out within the party, and I think all the right people have the opportunity now.
And not just in moral issues like euthanasia and pro-life. It's in energy, and it's in industrial relations, and it's in COVID and management of
heaven forbid that they should ever stand for fiscal responsibility.
What's that?
I know. When will we see a Liberal Party that actually is keen to do what it takes to reduce the amount of money that the government spends? You're in debt. It is irresponsible to spend money to put yourself further in debt when you are vastly in debt. You need to recover. You need to look at what you're spending on and decrease it. We need deregulate. No one stands for that. No one actually really does the hard yards. And I think that's partly because it's always the elected party fighting against a bureaucracy that's bigger than them, but it needs to be done. So it would be really nice to have a Liberal Party that stands for that.
Let's hope that Liberal review actually does bring out some new directions, new strategies, new commitments to change. We'd like to think so. As you said, some of the people who are not particularly appealing in the electorate have gone. Possibly Marshall will go as well, which is, we'll know that in about a week, I suspect, by the time the final count's in. But already with the Labor Party, the new leader who promised some, freedoms or review of freedoms and around the COVID management of the mandates has actually announced just today that they will be held, most of those will be held in place until, further notice. And the judicial review has been deferred as well. So the promise of change, within a few days, we look like being disappointed.
And I'm not surprised by that. The election did not communicate that the electorate is disappointed with current COVID policy. You wouldn't read that from it, I don't think. And so, because otherwise that right-wing minor party vote would
80 to 85%, if you said everything was 15%, bar the three reptiles that we have on our table here, including Greens, so I'm including Greens in the 85%, people played safe. They played safe. If you looked at them at the polling booths, they were walking in almost in a sort of a stupefied, that was the word that came to my mind, they were walking in going like that. So they played safe and they went with the majors. So I agree. The freedom vote, the rebel vote, if you like, the maverick vote, didn't really go past 15% as a... And so these guys, these three dinosaurs, if you like, are actually saying, well, we've got it, so why would we...
And that's the thing, the Liberal Party in a sense feels threatened after this, but only threatened by Labor, right? It was not a vote against the establishment or against current things. And that's a lesson that I would take away from the fact that the broad statistics of the vote didn't shift. In fact, if you look at the lower house and the statewide vote, if you add up Labor and the Greens, it adds up to almost exactly 50%. So we haven't shifted the broad statistics. The lesson for me in that is what I have been thinking and saying for the last couple of years. The battle is inside the major parties. Part of it is because we have compulsory voting, right? Everyone has to vote. And so you have some people who are informed and think in one certain way, but you have this massive block of voters who really are the brainless collective,
What are you
right? They
saying?
have no idea what they're voting for, and they would actually prefer not to vote. If you talk to any voters, you know that. If you ever hand out how to vote cards, you know that. The number of people who just walk along and grab one of each, they just want to collect the whole set, and then they go in there, and they're basically random number generators.
Unfortunately, that leads to not particularly good representative government, because you've got this, to use my word, stupefied group. And I've talked to a number of people from different electorates and different booths who echoed the same sort of observation. So there was this almost like, I just want to get this over with. I just want to get through this. And the Liberal Party, Labor Party thing, the nexus of this two-party preferred nexus is, I mean, I have to say I'm disappointed, because there was such volume of dissent and comment and, mood for change, and the minor parties, and what have we got? 85-15 between these three actors.
And unfortunately, that's often illusory. I suspected that it would be.
So the long game is to go inside these guys.
It is. And if you look at how the US politics work, for instance, it's definitely a two-horse race. There's never going to get anyone except a Republican or a Democrat. But the internal party politics are out in the open. Everyone knows who is fighting in what way to become an influencer in the party, to stand up. And so within the parties, you have a robust debate and fight for the soul of the party, which then helps to give the right options to the voters.
Well, AOC and the Squad, as they're called, there's 4 or 5 of them in the US scenario. They got inside the Democrat Party. They started off as the Young Turks and became Socialist Democrats, or whatever they call themselves. They're basically raging Marxists, and they're dragging the party left. And they're advocating for universal income and clean energy and so forth, open borders, and they have dragged the party, and so they're actually even going to primary some of the sitting Democratic candidates. So the same kind of thing could happen with the Labor Party. That's what concerns me a little bit, is this 8-year span we've been talking about. There's plenty of tolerance and time for factions within the Labor Party to drag it left. So, okay, well, we've been talking about the lessons and so forth. Let's try and bring this home, right? Let's land the plane, Nick. There's things going on with the Liberal Party and so on, but let's bring it home. What are the lessons? What are your takeouts from this? I mean, one of the things that really struck me and was a bit confronting was the nexus between the two parties is just very, very strong. I mean, I was surprised by it.
Yeah, this is a two-horse race.
It's a two-horse race.
As far as forming
with compulsory voting.
That's right. And look, I've shifted backwards and forwards about compulsory voting over the years. It's got its pros and cons. Currently, I'm opposed to it, because I do think that big portion of votes that I rudely called the brainless collective, they really are. They're just turning politics into noise, and that's unfortunate. But that's the game that's the way the board is set. So that's the game we have to play. So the big lesson for me then is that it is inside the major parties. The major parties themselves need to function properly and need to function transparently. And at this very moment, there is a fight on for the soul of the Liberal Party in South Australia, and all the Conservatives within the party, they have all the tools they need now to prosecute their case. An election was just lost. There is need for change. There's opportunity for change. They have to prosecute that case.
Well, as I said, for me, it was the strength of the two-party vote, right? The nexus. And there was no real cohesion in those minor party moderate voices. There was 12 to 15%, like we said, but there wasn't a cohesive voice to the electorate, which gives these guys a little bit of an escape card. And so the question will be in the eastern states, will it be difficult? It's too hard to, I can't pick that yet. There's a lot more strength of noise because of what's gone on in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland with the mandates. But will that translate on voting day, like it's just happened here? So we'll get to see that, right?
And it may be that on the eastern states exactly the same thing happens. It may be that there really isn't this mood for change on the right, although all of those who do want change already voted that way. There's not a shift. You need shift votes to actually change. But I really do agree it would be good if on the right there could be a party that emerges as a coherent voice
Well, it's
that
been
really
tried
pulls
before. It's
together.
been tried before, and for some reason, here we are looking at these three parties. We've got blue, red, and green. There's 10 to 12% of the vote, cohesive vote for that left vote, but there's not 10 to 12 cohesive vote for the right, and therefore the preferences don't cohesively follow towards one of the parties. And
there's no right-wing Greens.
Yeah,
there's no right-wing version of the Greens.
Yeah.
And I think that there are logical reasons for that, because the left is really a single position, and that's where the political centre of gravity in Australia is. On the right, you actually, libertarians and Christians and nationalists are actually three quite distinct groups. They don't necessarily want to stand together. But we need, if you like, a small, broad church on the right.
There's that word again. The other point, just following on from that, is that leading up to this election, there was a lot of activity. There was rallies, there was, social media, there were speeches, there were pop-up events. There was all sorts of talk and noise from this conservative, moderate, centre-right group that didn't cohesively form on the day, and preferences went to different groups. So you could almost argue, and this is one of my takeouts, I think there was a lot of distraction. I'll call it distraction, right? A lot of activity, a lot of noise, a lot of distraction, but the centre-right and conservative vote got caught a little bit unawares. Now, coming into the federal election, will we see the same thing happen? I think that voting bloc needs to get better organised, more strategic. We really need to think this through, because the two-party preferred system is so strong. And unless you can create a conservative version of the Greens, or at least get a cohesion across the parties, you have no way of actually removing these two parties.
Look, I think that is correct. So
you have to go outside the parties. I mean, like you've been saying, right?
So two important points in that. One is that I would be careful of projecting federal from state.
Yes.
And I think we're both agreed on that. That it seems, at least I've been hearing from people in the eastern states, that there really is a very different feel. And certainly if I lived in Victoria and I'd been in shutdown for 200 days total, I would start having some attitudes about politics that might be a bit different. South Australia, and I've noticed this, with comments on Twitter and things like that, a lot of people in the eastern states don't realise South Australia has been the easiest place to live over the last 2 years in Australia.
It was a more relaxed environment at the polling booth.
Yeah, and look, I have a desk job, right? I'm an engineer, I have a desk job. I worked from home over the last 2.5 years, a total of 5 days, right? No one in the entirety of Victoria could say that. So the experience and the catalysts for change may well be a lot stronger in the eastern states, but they also might not. It's just really difficult to predict. So that's what we're going to have to wait and see. But it would help if those on the right, if Conservatives realise their job is not to preach to the converted, it is to win votes. And rallies preach to the converted. The people who go there are the people who already care a lot and already think that way. If you want to win portion from the swinging voters, you need brand coherence, you need presence, you need to actually be there on election day with how to vote cards. You're not going to do that if you're all distributed amongst 4 different parties who are all vying for that voting bloc.
You need to be cohesive, you need to be focused, and these guys were campaigning, the Labor Party was saying 12 to 18 months, right? So a 4 to 6 week campaign by the alternative, thoughts on how it should go, it's not going to cut it. And it didn't cut it, and it won't cut it in the future. So, and look, my final big point on this is, and this is a big point, the centre-right and the Conservative vote has to be far more strategic, far more focused, far more cohesive, and far more diligent, if that's the word, to actually affect the change. It will not come naturally. It won't come through dissent or dissatisfaction. It has to come through a cohesive effort. That's the really big takeout for me. And for a combined vote of 12 to 15%, using that sort of spread, because depending on what you put in there, but it absolutely is no more than 15%, is really disappointing. And social media was devastated, after, and so that's a big point, because, the hope is shattered. So where does that? I mean, people are now going.
But that's democracy. Democracy tells you what proportion of the vote actually agree with you. They can speak as loud as they like at a rally. Doesn't mean they're a majority. I think, like several years back, of course, Cory Bernardi had his attempt at putting the Australian Conservatives together and was trying to collate or
2.7%
pull
of the
together, exactly. He was trying to pull together those right-wing minor party votes. And I think there were some good aspects of that. One was a very coherent and comprehensive policy platform. The only one of the right-wing minor parties that does that at the moment, I think, are the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
But the problem is, it's just no one's succeeding. For me, I hope one of them does. I hope the right-wing minor parties can pull it together.
Let's see how UAP and One Nation go at the federal level.
Let's see what happens.
That's going to be a litmus test.
But for me, still, the immediate hopes are in the internal politics of the major parties. I want to see that transparent, and I want to see the Conservatives within the Liberal Party prosecuting their case, and I want to see more people joining the major parties. The membership is astonishingly low. It's ridiculously low. And so in Australia, you know, you've got 1 in 10 people works for the government in the workforce. You've got like 1 in 1,000 is a member of a major party. So a huge amount of top-down power, very little bottom-up. We need more participation and involvement within politics, because the population-wide vote is noise and is not where the fight is on. The fight's on inside the major parties. That's my takeaway.
Nick is a supreme optimist, and we'll track forward. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time in Understory.